Well, turning now to our big story, focusing on Ella Fitzgerald Park that opened up this summer on the city's northwest side. It's not just a 2.5-acre community space, but it's part of the Fitzgerald revitalization project that the city is leading. It includes rehabbing over 100 homes and demoing 26 others, as well as a greenway that connects the neighborhood. But can this translate to other neighborhoods in the city? Is it happening fast enough? And do residents feel like they're part of the process? A July Saturday on Detroit's northwest side, where the Fitzgerald neighborhood takes official possession of its new park. Ella Fitzgerald Park is made up of vacant land where tracts of homes once stood.
I think this is probably the largest park that's made from scratch, from vacant lots that you'll find anywhere in an urban neighborhood.
Detroit City Planner Maurice Cox came to Fitzgerald to find 400 lots where houses once stood or needed to be removed. Then came ideas. Why not turn some of the lots into a park and make a greenway that runs across the neighborhood?
The idea was that you should be able to bike from your house to a park. You should be able to go along a greenway to get to some of the resources and amenities of the neighborhood, all on biking and walking.
We held our first activity day right here, knowing that one day the Ella Fitzgerald Community Park would be erected in this very same spot.
There's been a lot of talk recently about revitalization in Fitzgerald, anchored by the University of Detroit Mercy and Marygrove College. Detroiter Gaston Nash lived in college towns in Indiana and Ohio. He saw neighborhoods near the schools were thriving, and he thought about that when he moved to Fitzgerald.
I lived in Columbus, and you know, every neighborhood or community around their colleges was beautiful. And so you come home and you're like, well, what's going on with U of D and Marygrove?
Nash is part of the College Core Block Club, a group that helped revive the neighborhood's other park, Lolo Park on Puritan Avenue. The residents here were excited to hear about the city's big neighborhood rehabilitation plan that made headlines, but that was a year ago.
At the time when we announced this, I think people assumed, okay, this is going to start now. What were we waiting a year for? And now the announcement comes out, well, we're just getting the properties to start working.
Nash feels the city hadn't been straightforward with the community about the project's timeline. And he reminds us there was a mayoral election last year.
And that's exactly what it was. It was, we are doing something in the neighborhoods. Look at us.
Well, how did the park turn out? Looks a little bit better than the vacant houses that we had along here, doesn't it?
Now the rehabilitation plan is really rolling with another announcement. The first 3 homes are fixed and ready for market.
We know we got a ways to go. We got new street surface, new sidewalks, but you don't have to look too far to see we got to work our way down the street now that we got the park rebuilt, to get these houses rebuilt, to move families back in, but it's going to be a whole lot easier.
And if Fitzgerald can come back, guess what? Every neighborhood in Detroit can come back. This is just like the cornerstone. Okay, great. Okay.
Plans have more than 100 more homes to be rehabbed. That's over 2 years. And there's that greenway running from Marygrove College to the west to U of D on the east, past homes and crossing streets with signage marking the way.
Like the super graphics on the street you see here, which are an interpretation of an Ella Fitzgerald song, Dream a Little Dream with Me, signals to everyone that you're in a park zone.
Cox said the ideas here could turn up in other Detroit neighborhoods.
It's something different. It's something new. It's not what it used to be. It's a whole new concept of what a neighborhood can be.
You know, just this month, 3 rehabbed homes went on the market, listed for between $55,000 and $90,000. The project is being led by Fitz Forward, which is made up of Century Partners, which is a development group, and The Platform, which is a development and design group involved in projects all around the city. So let's bring in Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley in for this discussion. You know, a lot of urban planners were in Detroit this week and talking about what was happening in Fitzgerald and looking at it as an example of what it could be for other neighborhoods. But is the biggest issue, and I'm going to start with you here, Stephen, first, bringing this up to a larger scale when you're looking at just a small area of one neighborhood?
Well, I mean, so there are a number of different things going on here, and one of them is the lesson that everybody learns when they decide to get involved in trying to turn around Detroit neighborhoods. It's that the problems are deeper than you thought they were, they're more extensive than you thought they were, and they're more expensive to deal with. And so that's what we're seeing in Fitzgerald, is that this was a grand plan to transform a pretty wide part of the city in a short period of time, and that's just not really possible. You have to take smaller chunks, you have to deal with smaller chunks, and you got to be more patient about how you do it. This is an important experiment for the city because it's a neighborhood that it doesn't look like a lot of the other places where we've seen redevelopment really take hold and take hold faster. It's deeper in the hole than other places, and it's just not going to work out exactly the way you want. People are frustrated, but they've got to start to learn to be patient and see how hard it is and then scale it up.
Yeah, some people who live in the area said they were a little frustrated about how long it was taking to get things started, Nolan, and to see a little bit of change. But doesn't that speak to the nature of, if you're doing something new for the first time and trying to figure out different things, it's going to take a little bit of time. But they need to get the feedback, though, from people who are living in the area.
And people have waited and waited for a long time for something to happen in the neighborhoods. We've asked a lot of patience for people when we say stay put, change is coming, better things are coming. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, it took 60 years to get to this point. It didn't collapse all at once. It's not going to come back all at once. And I think you do have to do it sort of, as Steve said, small chunks, block at a time, find out what works, try to replicate it, and then start concentrating on growth, on bringing new people in, because it's hard to redevelop neighborhoods if all you're doing is shifting people around, leaving holes one place to fill another place. I think we really need to start concentrating on population growth, bringing people back into the neighborhoods.
It's interesting, in doing this story, and we talked to several people who are living in the area, one of the concerns that was brought up also is there's a potential change in the economy and the money and the infusion that's happening right now in Fitzgerald and some other areas. What if that money dries up in another couple of years? What does that mean for some of these projects?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a window, I think, 3 to 5, maybe 7 years where this kind of interest in investing in Detroit is going to be as high as it is, and then we'll go back to hopefully not what it was 20 years ago, but it'll go back to a more normal level. And so we've got to make use of that interest now and make sure we get the things that we can out of it, and again, get these models, right? If you can turn around a small part of a neighborhood like Fitzgerald, that is something you can pick up and port to other places, but you got to focus on that and not get distracted by scale. And that's one of our big problems in Detroit, is that everything is so big. The city is so big, neighborhoods are so big, the problems are so big. We get caught up trying to say we're going to solve all of it, as opposed to saying, let's take a little chunk of it, let's fix that, and then move to the next thing.
Is this a legitimate thing, though, that the administration can point to and say, see, when you talk about the narrative of downtown development and no one's doing anything in the neighborhoods, that this is indeed something that we're doing to start to develop, and if it catches hold here or if it works here, we can bring it to other areas?
I think it's a piece. I mean, if this were the only thing that was being done, I think it would be a pretty weak argument, but you can now look all over the city at places where the neighborhoods are getting attention. They're getting attention from philanthropic groups, but also from private business developers, and certainly from the city. I believe over the last 2 years, you've seen a real shift in the conversation away from downtown. There's a sense that downtown's comeback is sustainable, doesn't need a whole lot of help, and the concentration has been by the foundations and also by a lot of developers on the neighborhoods. And again, there's pieces all over the place you could point to and say, we hope it starts knitting together.
But what we really need to see also is a pivot to investing in the human capital in those neighborhoods. It's not just about fixing houses and creating community. That's really important, but you have tremendous challenges with the people who live in these neighborhoods. They need a lot of things that they haven't gotten for a really long time, and the truth is, you can spend millions of dollars turning a neighborhood around physically, and if you don't also invest in making more opportunities available, dealing with some of the deficits that people face every day, you're not really changing the neighborhood.
And I think it's also interesting too, along that line, I've talked to Maurice Cox several times about the ideas and the plans and how they've come up with certain ideas of what to do in different neighborhoods, and making sure that people who are living there right now have a say in that and say, well, this is something that I'd like to see in the neighborhood, not necessarily what makes the most sense in terms of a large-scale planning or what would be the newest and greatest thing that we can do in this area.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about the things that Detroiters deal with every day: food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of opportunity, lack of education. Those things are not the kind of things that when you go in and say, I'm going to turn around a neighborhood, that you automatically focus on. You focus on housing, right? Let's improve the housing stock in this neighborhood. Let's attract people who can pay money for that new housing. You've got to do both. Otherwise, what you're creating is a different neighborhood in place of what was there, and you will push the people who are there out. I think Maurice Cox really understands the difference and is trying to focus on that, but we do need more focus on that investment in human capital by everybody.
And we need to make these neighborhoods self-sustaining, holistic. If you live in a neighborhood, there ought to be a place within that neighborhood you can go, as Steve said, get your groceries, but also go to the doctor, go to the dentist, go to the accountant, bakeries, all the things that make a neighborhood a whole.
Livable.
And there's too few of those still in the city. Even in the downtown core, there's still too little of those things that keep you home, rather than force you to get in your car and drive out to the suburbs.
Yeah, well, we're going to continue to follow what's happening in Fitzgerald and a couple of other pockets in the city, and see what's happening, what's going to transpire.